The morning sun painted golden stripes across the wooden floors of Sunrise Cafe, a small haven tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop on Maple Street. The aroma of freshly ground coffee beans mixed with a sweet scent of cinnamon rolls, creating an atmosphere that made customers want to linger. Christina Williams moved with practiced grace behind the counter, her warm smile greeting each customer like they were old friends. At 24, she had been working at the cafe for 3 years, and despite the challenges she sometimes faced, she genuinely loved making people's mornings brighter. Christina hummed softly as she prepared a cappuccino, the steam wand hissing rhythmically. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her black apron bore the cafe's cheerful logo, a rising sun with coffee cup silhouette. She had learned to find joy in the small moments, the grateful nod from the businessman who needed his daily caffeine fix, the giggle from the little girl who always got hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, the satisfied sigh from the elderly couple who shared a scone every Tuesday morning. The morning rush had just ended, leaving behind a peaceful lull. Only a handful of customers remained, some reading newspapers, others typing on laptops, all contributing to the cafe's gentle hum of contentment. Christina wiped down the counter, her movements automatic after years of practice. She took pride in keeping her workspace spotless, believing that cleanliness reflected respect for both the customers and the craft of coffee-making. Near the window, a man in a baseball cap and sunglasses sat quietly, his large frame somehow managing to blend into the background despite his obvious size. John Cena had chosen this particular cafe precisely because it felt removed from the chaos of his public life. He could simply be another customer enjoying a peaceful moment before his day became a whirlwind of meetings and obligations. He watched Christina wait, impressed by her professionalism and the genuine warmth she showed every customer. The cafe's charm lay in its authenticity. Unlike the chain coffee shops that dominated the city, Sunrise Cafe had character. Local artwork adorned the walls, each piece telling a story of the community. Mismatched vintage chairs surrounded reclaimed wood tables, and plants hung from the ceiling, their green leaves catching the morning light. The owner, Mrs. Patterson, had created more than just a business. She had built a sanctuary where people from all walks of life could find common ground over a shared love of good coffee. Christina noticed the quiet man near the window had finished his coffee. She approached with a fresh pot, her smile genuine and unhurried. "Would you like a refill?" she asked, her voice carrying the warmth that made customers feel at home. John nodded gratefully, appreciating her attentiveness without any hint of recognition-seeking. This was exactly the kind of normal interaction he craved. As Christina poured the coffee, she shared a brief observation about the weather, mentioning how the sunshine made everyone seem a little happier. John found himself smiling beneath his disguise. There was something refreshing about her perspective, the way she found positivity in simple things. It reminded him why he fought so hard to protect ordinary people's right to live their lives with dignity and respect. The morning seemed destined to continue in this peaceful rhythm. Christina returned to her station, beginning to prepare for the lunch crowd that would arrive in a few hours. She checked supplies, restocked napkins, and arranged pastries in the display case with artistic precision. Each task was performed with care, reflecting a belief that every job, no matter how small others might consider it, deserved to be done well. The cafe's regulars knew Christina by name, and she knew their orders by heart. Mrs. Thompson always wanted her coffee black with 1 sugar cube, never 2. Dr. Rodriguez preferred his espresso with just a touch of steamed milk. The college student in the corner always ordered the same blueberry muffin, claiming it brought him good luck on exam days. These connections mattered to Christina. They transformed routine transactions into meaningful human interactions. John observed this dynamic with growing respect. In his world of stadiums filled with thousands of screaming fans, he sometimes forgot how powerful quiet kindness could be. Christina embodied something authentic that his celebrity world often lacked. She treated every person with equal respect, whether they ordered an expensive specialty drink or just asked for a cup of water. The morning light continued to stream through the windows, creating an almost ethereal glow around the cafe's interior. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams, and the soft jazz playing from the speakers added to the tranquil atmosphere. Christina glanced at the clock, noting that the peaceful interlude would soon give way to the lunch rush. She took a deep breath, centering herself for the busy hours ahead. Neither Christina nor John could have predicted that their quiet morning was about to be shattered. The peace they both cherished was fragile, and sometimes it takes only moments for everything to change. The door remained closed, the street outside calm. But somewhere in the distance, the rumble of motorcycle engines grew steadily louder, carrying with it a storm that would test everything Christina believed about standing up for herself and everything John believed about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The tranquil atmosphere shattered like glass as the cafe door burst open with violent force. The brass bell above the entrance clanged frantically, its cheerful chime replaced by an ominous warning. 3 men strode in, their heavy boots thundering against the hardwood floor with deliberate intimidation. They wore leather jackets adorned with patches and chains, their presence immediately poisoning the air with hostility and crude menace. The leader, an imposing figure with a wild beard and cold gray eyes, surveyed the cafe like a predator sizing up prey. His jacket bore the insignia of a notorious motorcycle club known for causing trouble throughout the county. Behind him, his companions snickered and whispered, their voices carrying crude jokes and offensive comments. The blond one cracked his knuckles loudly, while the third man, shorter but stockier, kept glancing around as if marking territory. Every customer in the cafe felt the shift immediately. Conversations died mid-sentence, newspapers were lowered, and laptop screens went ignored. The elderly couple near the window exchanged worried glances. The college student quickly packed his books, sensing danger. Even the soft jazz seemed to fade into nervous silence. John Cena remained motionless in his corner, but his posture subtly changed, muscles tensing beneath his casual clothing. Christina felt her stomach tighten as she recognized the type of customers who had just entered. She had encountered their kind before, men who seemed to take pleasure in making others uncomfortable, who viewed service workers as targets for their frustrations and prejudices. But she had learned through experience that showing fear only encouraged them. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and prepared to do her job with the same professionalism she showed every customer. "Good morning, gentlemen," Christina said, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. "What can I get for you today?" Her training kicked in automatically. Smile, make eye contact, treat everyone with respect. She had served difficult customers before and managed to diffuse tense situations through patience and kindness. Perhaps these men would surprise her. The leader's eyes fixed on Christina with an intensity that made her skin crawl. His gaze traveled from her face to her name tag, then back again with obvious disdain. Well, he said, his voice dripping with mock surprise. "Look what we have here, boys. Didn't know this place was so diverse in its hiring practices." His companions laughed, the sound harsh and grating in the previously peaceful space. Christina's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the counter, but she maintained her composure. Years of dealing with prejudice had taught her to recognize the signs, the loaded words, the meaningful glances between the men, the way they positioned themselves to intimidate. She had hoped those days were behind her, but apparently some battles had to be fought repeatedly. "I asked what I could get for you," Christina repeated, her voice growing firmer. She refused to acknowledge their obvious attempt to provoke her. Mrs. Patterson had trained all employees to maintain dignity in difficult situations, and Christina was determined to uphold those standards. She would not give these men the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. The blond biker stepped closer to the counter, his rings catching the light as he drummed his fingers on the surface. "You know," he said conversationally, as if discussing the weather, "I'm not sure I trust food or drinks made by certain types of people. You never know what they might put in there." His words carried clear implications, and his friends nodded in agreement, their expressions growing more hostile. Around the cafe, remaining customers began to quietly gather their belongings. The peaceful morning crowd wanted no part of whatever was about to unfold. Some left money on tables and slipped out the door, while others retreated to far corners, phones ready to call for help if needed. The safe haven that Sunrise Cafe represented was rapidly becoming a battleground. John Cena watched the scene develop with growing concern. He had witnessed this type of harassment before, and he knew how quickly it could escalate. Every instinct told him to intervene immediately, but experience had taught him to assess situations carefully. Sometimes premature action could make things worse. He observed Christina's body language, noting her determination not to be intimidated. She was handling herself well, but he remained ready to act the moment the situation crossed the line. The leader leaned across the counter, bringing his face uncomfortably close to Christina's. His breath smelled of cigarettes and alcohol, and his eyes held a cool gleam that spoke of someone who enjoyed causing pain. "Listen here, go," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "People like you need to remember their place. You are here to serve, not to act all high and mighty." Christina's jaw clenched, but she held her ground. "I'm here to do my job," she replied evenly, "which is serving coffee to customers who want it. If you'd like to place an order, I'm happy to help. If not, I need to ask you to make room for other customers." Her voice carried quiet strength, the kind that comes from years of refusing to be diminished by others' hatred. The third biker, who had been silent until now, suddenly slammed his palm on the counter. The sharp sound echoed through the cafe like a gunshot, causing the few remaining customers to jump. "Did you hear that?" he said to his companions. "She's got attitude. Thinks she's better than us." The menace in his voice was unmistakable, and Christina realized that her attempts at professional courtesy were only making them angrier. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. What had started as uncomfortable harassment was becoming something more dangerous. The leader's hand moved toward his pocket, and Christina caught a glimpse of metal. Her heart began to race as she realized these men had come prepared for violence. The peaceful morning had become a nightmare, and she was trapped behind the counter with nowhere to run. In his corner, John Cena made a decision. He had seen enough to know that these men would not be discouraged by words or reason. Christina had shown remarkable courage, but she was facing a situation that no one should have to handle alone. The time for observation had ended. It was time to act. The tension in Sunrise Cafe reached a breaking point as the leader's hand emerged from his pocket, revealing the cold steel of a switchblade. The knife caught the morning sunlight, casting menacing shadows across the counter as he held it casually, almost playfully, as if it were nothing more than a coffee stirrer. Christina's eyes widened at the sight, but she refused to step back. Years of facing prejudice had taught her that showing fear often made situations worse. "Now that's a pretty knife," the blonde biker said with mock admiration, his voice carrying the tone of someone enjoying a show. "Wonder what it's used for." The third man laughed, a sound devoid of any humor, while the leader turned the blade slowly, letting the light play across its surface. The remaining customers in the cafe shrank further into their corners, some pulling out phones to call for help, others too frozen with fear to move. Christina's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice remained steady as she spoke. "There's no need for weapons here," she said, her hands visible on the counter, showing she posed no threat. "I'm just trying to do my job. If you don't want to order anything, please leave and let other customers enjoy their morning." Her words carried the dignity of someone who refused to be intimidated, even when facing clear danger. The leader's eyes narrowed at her continued defiance. In his world, service workers were supposed to cower, to beg, to acknowledge their supposed inferiority. Christina's quiet strength clearly infuriated him. "You think you're smart, don't you?" he snarled, stepping closer to the counter. "Think you can talk back to us like we're nobody?" The knife moved closer to Christina's direction, though he hadn't yet made any direct threats with it. From his position near the window, John Cena assessed the situation with a tactical awareness that had served him well throughout his career. He could see that Christina was handling herself with remarkable composure, but the introduction of a weapon had changed everything. These weren't just bullies looking to intimidate. They were dangerous men prepared to use violence. The time for hoping they would leave peacefully had passed. The cafe had become eerily quiet except for the sound of the coffee machine's gentle hum and the distant traffic outside. The normal sounds of morning conversation, clinking cups, and rustling newspapers had been replaced by the electric silence of impending violence. Even the jazz music seemed to mock the situation, its cheerful melody a stark contrast to the dark reality unfolding at the counter. "You know what I think?" the leader continued, his voice growing louder, more aggressive. "I think you need to learn some respect. I think you need to understand that when people like us walk in here, you should be grateful we're giving you our business." He gestured with a knife for emphasis, the blade cutting through the air inches from Christina's face. "Maybe you need a lesson in proper customer service." Christina's composure finally showed its first crack, not from fear, but from a flash of righteous anger that she had been suppressing. "I know exactly how to treat customers," she said, her voice carrying new steel. "But customers treat people with respect. What you're doing isn't business, it's harassment." The words came out before she could stop them, and she immediately saw the fury that blazed in the leader's eyes. The blonde biker laughed harshly. "Oh, she's got fire now," he said, clapping slowly in mock appreciation. "Listen to her talking back like she has rights or something." His words dripped with a kind of casual cruelty that suggested this wasn't his first time participating in such harassment. These men had clearly done this before, in other places, to other innocent people. John Cena had heard enough. The conversation had moved beyond harassment into open threats of violence against an innocent woman whose only crime was trying to do her job with dignity. He stood slowly, his considerable frame unfolding from the chair with deliberate purpose. The movement was smooth, controlled, but unmistakably threatening to anyone who knew how to read body language. The leader noticed the movement in his peripheral vision and toned, his knife still in hand. "What are you looking at?" he demanded, his voice carrying the bravado of someone accustomed to intimidating others. "This doesn't concern you, so sit back down and mind your own business." The other two bikers turned as well, sizing up this new potential threat to their dominance. John removed his sunglasses slowly, folding them carefully and placing them in his shirt pocket. His eyes, when they met the leader's gaze, were calm but held an unmistakable promise of consequences. "Actually," he said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that commanded attention, "it does concern me. It concerns anyone with a conscience." He took a step forward, not aggressive, but purposeful. The recognition hit the bikers at different moments. The third man's eyes widened first, then the blonde's mouth fell open slightly. The leader took a moment longer, his focus initially on the size and obvious physical conditioning of the man facing him. When realization finally dawned, his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something approaching panic. "Holy!" the blonde muttered, his bravado evaporating instantly. "That's John Cena." The name seemed to echo in the suddenly silent cafe, carrying weight that even the most ignorant couldn't ignore. This wasn't just some random customer who had decided to play hero. This was a man whose reputation for standing up to bullies was legendary, whose physical capabilities were beyond question. But the leader, perhaps driven by pride or stupidity or the need to maintain face in front of his followers, didn't back down. Instead, he raised the knife higher, his grip tightening on the handle. "I don't care who you think you are," he snarled, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "This is between us and her. Walk away now, or you'll regret getting involved." John's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. The casual observer might not have noticed, but anyone with combat experience would have recognized the subtle adjustment of weight, the slight bend of knees, the positioning of hands. He was no longer just standing. He was preparing. "The only thing I regret," he said quietly, "is if I let you hurt her." Christina watched the standoff with a mixture of gratitude and terror. She had prayed for help, but she hadn't expected it to come in the form of one of the most famous athletes in the world. The situation had moved beyond her completely now, but she remained at the center of it, trapped behind a counter that had become ground zero for a confrontation that would soon turn violent. The leader's hand shook slightly as he held the knife, whether from adrenaline or fear. It was impossible to tell. But the blade remained pointed toward the center of the cafe, a threat to everyone present. The moment balanced on a knife's edge, waiting for someone to make the move that would shatter the last pretense of civilized behavior. The explosion of violence came without warning. The leader, perhaps realizing that his reputation among his followers was at stake, lunged forward with a switchblade aimed directly at John Cena's chest. What happened next unfolded with the swift precision of a choreographed dance, except the stakes were life and death, and there was no rehearsal for this performance. John moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years training his body to respond faster than thought. As the knife swept toward him, he sidestepped with minimal effort, his right hand shooting out to catch the attacker's wrist in an iron grip. The sound of bone grinding against bone was audible as John's fingers found the pressure points that would make the leader's hand involuntarily open. The switchblade clattered to the floor, its metallic ring echoing through the silent cafe like a bell tolling the end of the confrontation. The leader's eyes widened in shock and pain as John twisted his arm behind his back in one smooth motion. "I gave you a chance to walk away," John said quietly, his voice carrying no anger, only disappointed certainty. The man who moments before had been terrorizing Christina now found himself completely helpless, his face pressed against the cafe counter, his feet barely touching the ground as John held him with effortless control. The blonde biker, seeing his leader disabled so quickly, made a desperate decision to charge. His attack was clumsy, driven by panic rather than strategy, his fist swinging wildly as he rushed forward. John didn't even need to release his hold on the first attacker. With his free hand, he caught the blonde man punch mid-swing, using the biker's own momentum to spin him around and send him crashing into a nearby table. The impact scattered coffee cups and newspapers, the sharp crack of wood-meeting flesh punctuating the violence. Christina watched in fascination and horror as the scene unfolded before her. She had seen action movies, of course, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of watching someone defend her with such skill and controlled power. John wasn't fighting with rage or brutality. He was neutralizing threats with surgical precision, using only the force necessary to stop the attacks while ensuring no innocent bystanders were hurt. The third biker, the shortest and stockiest of the group, hesitated for a crucial moment as he watched his companions fall. That hesitation proved fatal to his chances. By the time he decided to join the fight, John had already repositioned himself, still maintaining control of the leader while simultaneously blocking the new attacker's path to Christina. The stocky man threw a wild punch that John ducked easily, responding with an uppercut that lifted the biker off his feet and sent him tumbling backward into a chair. The entire confrontation lasted less than 30 seconds. 3 men who had entered the cafe with the intention of terrorizing an innocent woman now lay groaning on the floor, their weapons scattered, their pride shattered along with their ability to threaten anyone. John released his grip on the leader, who slumped against the counter, clutching his twisted arm and staring up at his opponent with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. "Stay down," John commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who had just demonstrated his complete dominance. "All of you." The bikers made no attempt to rise. The fight had gone out of them as quickly as it had begun. They had entered expecting to intimidate a defenseless woman, and instead had encountered a force they were completely unprepared to handle. Christina found her voice at last, though it trembled with residual adrenaline. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes meeting John's across the wreckage of what had been a peaceful morning. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't." She couldn't finish the sentence, the reality of how close she had come to serious harm finally hitting her with full force. John's expression softened as he looked at her, the warrior intensity fading to reveal genuine concern. "You don't need to thank me," he said gently. "You were handling yourself with more courage than most people could manage. I just made sure they couldn't take it any further." He glanced around the cafe, noting the overturned furniture and scattered debris. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you before I intervened?" "No," Christina replied, shakily checking herself for injuries she didn't have. "No, I'm okay. Scared, but okay." She looked down at the 3 men on the floor, noting that they were conscious but clearly unwilling to continue their aggression. The leader was still clutching his arm, his face pale with pain and humiliation. The blonde was sitting up slowly, testing his movements carefully. The stocky one remained on his back, staring at the ceiling as if contemplating his life choices. The sound of sirens began to fill the air, growing louder as they approached. Someone had called the police during the confrontation, and now the full weight of law enforcement was descending on the cafe. John nodded with satisfaction. He had no desire to continue dealing with these men longer than necessary, and official intervention would ensure they faced proper consequences for their actions. "The police are coming," John announced to the defeated bikers, though they had undoubtedly heard the sirens themselves. "I suggest you stay exactly where you are and cause no more trouble. You've embarrassed yourselves enough for one day." His words carried the finality of someone who had seen this type of confrontation play out many times before. The leader attempted to speak, his voice a hoarse whisper of his former arrogance. "This isn't over," he managed, though the words carried no conviction. "You can't always be around to protect her." The threat was pathetic in its emptiness, coming from a man who could barely sit up straight, but it still caused Christina to shiver with apprehension. John knelt down beside the fallen leader, bringing his face close enough that his words would be heard clearly but softly enough that they wouldn't carry to others in the cafe. "If you or your friends ever come near this woman again," he said with quiet intensity, "if you so much as drive past this cafe or mention her name to anyone, I will find you. And next time, I won't be nearly so gentle. Do we understand each other?" The leader nodded frantically, his earlier bravado completely extinguished. He had just experienced firsthand what happened when someone with real power decided to stand against injustice, and the lesson had been both swift and memorable. The police sirens grew louder, and the cafe prepared to transition from battleground back to the peaceful haven it had been before three men had made the mistake of thinking they could terrorize an innocent woman without consequences. The police arrived in a symphony of sirens and flashing lights, their presence immediately transforming Sunrise Cafe from a crime scene back into a place of safety. 3 patrol cars pulled up outside, their occupants emerging with the practiced efficiency of officers who had responded to countless similar calls. The lead officer, Sergeant Martinez, entered first, his experienced eyes quickly assessing the scene. 3 subdued men on the floor, broken furniture, and a visibly shaken but unharmed barista behind the counter. "Nobody move," Sergeant Martinez commanded, though his tone was more procedural than concerned. It was obvious from the tableau before him that the immediate danger had passed. The 3 bikers remained exactly where John had left them, none showing any inclination to cause further trouble. The leader continued clutching his arm, while his companions nursed their wounded pride along with their physical injuries. John stood calmly beside the counter, his hands visible and his posture non-threatening. He had been through similar situations before and knew exactly how to behave when law enforcement arrived. "Officer," he said respectfully, "I'm the one who restrained these men. They were threatening the employee with a knife." He gestured toward the switchblade, which still lay on the floor where it had fallen during the struggle. Christina stepped forward, her voice gaining strength as she began to recount the events. "These men came in and started harassing me," she explained, her words clear and precise despite the emotional weight of what she had endured. "They made threats, used racial slurs, and then that one pulled a knife on me." She pointed to the leader, who avoided her gaze entirely. "This gentleman stopped them from hurting me." Sergeant Martinez nodded, pulling out his notepad to record the details. His questions were thorough but sensitive, designed to gather the facts without further traumatizing the victim. Other officers attended to the bikers, checking for serious injuries while preparing them for transport. The cafe's few remaining customers provided witness statements, their accounts uniformly supporting Christina's version of events. "I've seen these 3 before," one of the junior officers remarked as he helped the blonde biker to his feet. "They are part of that motorcycle club that's been causing trouble across 3 counties. We had complaints about them harassing service workers at restaurants and gas stations." The officer's disgust was evident in his voice. "Finally caught them in the act." The leader, now handcuffed and facing transport to jail, made one last attempt at defiance. "You can't prove anything," he muttered, though his words lacked conviction. "It's our word against theirs." His bravado was pathetic now, the desperate posturing of a man who knew he had been caught red-handed and thoroughly defeated. "Actually," Sergeant Martinez replied with satisfaction, "we can prove quite a bit. 3 independent witnesses, security footage from the cafe's cameras, and physical evidence including the weapon you threatened her with." He gestured to the knife, now sealed in an evidence bag. "You gentlemen are looking at assault, terroristic threatening, and hate crime enhancements. I'd say your word against us isn't going to amount to much in court." As the bikers were loaded into patrol cars, the leader made one final attempt to salvage his reputation. "This isn't over. Cena!" he shouted as officers guided him toward the door. "You think you're some kind of hero, but you can't be everywhere." His words echoed with a hollow ring of impotent rage, a final tantrum from a bully who had finally met his match. John approached the patrol car window as the officer prepared to drive away. His voice was calm but carried unmistakable authority as he addressed the defeated leader. "You're right that I can't be everywhere," he said evenly. "But I have a lot of friends who can be. Word gets around when someone threatens innocent people. I'd suggest you use your time in jail to think about making better choices." The police cars pulled away, taking with them the source of terror that had disrupted the morning peace. The cafe began to return to normal, though the overturned furniture and scattered debris served as reminders of how quickly violence could intrude on ordinary life. Christina began cleaning up, her movements automatic as she processed everything that had happened. "Let me help with that," John offered, beginning to right the fallen chairs. Other customers who had remained joined in, creating an impromptu community effort to restore the cafe to its former welcoming state. The shared experience had bonded them in a way that transcended their previous anonymity as mere coffee shop patrons. Mrs. Patterson, The cafe owner arrived just as the cleanup were finishing. She had been called by a customer and rushed over, expecting to find her business destroyed and her employee traumatized. Instead, she found Christina directing the restoration efforts with quiet competence while John Cena helped stack chairs. "Christina, are you all right?" she asked immediately, her concern evident. "I'm okay, Mrs. Patterson," Christina replied, and for the first time since the incident began, she truly meant it. "Actually, I'm better than okay. I learned something important today about standing up for myself and about the good people who will stand with you when it matters." She looked at John with genuine gratitude. "I learned that there are still heroes in the world." The local news crews began arriving as word of the incident spread. The story of a famous wrestler defending a cafe worker from harassment was exactly the kind of feel-good news that captured public attention. But John declined most interview requests, preferring to let Christina tell her own story. When he did speak to reporters, he consistently directed attention to her courage rather than his own actions. "The real hero here is Christina," John told the assembled media. "She faced down 3 armed men with more dignity and strength than most people could manage. I just made sure they couldn't hurt her." But she was already winning that fight through her courage and refusal to be intimidated. His words carried the weight of genuine respect and admiration. As the day wore on, the cafe experienced an unexpected surge of support. Customers arrived throughout the afternoon, many specifically asking for Christina to serve them. Word had spread through social media about her brave stand against harassment, and people wanted to show their support. The tip jar overflowed with contributions from strangers who had been moved by her story. John remained at the cafe for several hours, partly to ensure no retaliation occurred, but mostly because he found himself genuinely enjoying the atmosphere. The incident had revealed the true character of everyone present, the cowardice of bullies when confronted with real strength, the courage of ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, and the power of community when individuals choose to stand together. As evening approached and John prepared to leave, Christina approached him one final time. "I know I've already thanked you," she said, "but I want you to know that what you did today changed something in me. I've always tried to handle difficult customers professionally, but I've also always backed down when things got really bad. Today I learned that sometimes you have to draw a line and defend it." John smiled, genuinely moved by her words. "You drew that line before I ever got involved," he reminded her. "I just made sure they couldn't cross it. But the strength to stand up for yourself, that came from you. Don't ever forget that." He placed a generous tip in the jar and headed toward the door, pausing to add, "And don't forget that there are more good people in the world than bad ones. Sometimes they just need to see someone else stand up first." The cafe closed that evening with Christina working her full shift, serving customers with renewed confidence and pride. The incident that could have broken her spirit had instead revealed her strength. The 3 bikers faced serious charges and the certainty of significant jail time. Most importantly, word had spread throughout the community that Sunrise Cafe was a place where dignity was respected and harassment would not be tolerated. As Christina turned off the lights and locked the door behind her, she reflected on how a morning that began with routine service had become a defining moment in her life. She had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but action in spite of fear. She had discovered that heroes sometimes come in unexpected forms and that standing up for justice, even in small ways, can change everything. The story would be retold countless times in the days and weeks that followed, inspiring others to speak up against harassment and giving hope to service workers everywhere who face similar challenges. But for Christina Williams, barista at Sunrise Cafe, it would always be remembered as a morning she discovered her own strength and learned that she was never truly alone in the fight against injustice. The next morning, she returned to work with her head held high, ready to serve coffee with the same warmth and professionalism she had always shown, but now backed by the unshakable knowledge that she would never again allow anyone to treat her with anything less than the respect every human being deserves.